3, 2, 1. We are live. My man, Wayne, how are you, brother?
I'm great. How are you
Shane,
doing?
Wayne, I got Shane on the brain. Wayne, I'm very good. Guys, I'm joined this week by a man I've known since university days, and it's been incredible to watch his progress working in the human rights sector. He is now the head of strategic litigation at Lawyers for Human Rights. Wayne, thanks so much for taking the time to come out, brother, and see me. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a bit.
Yeah, how you doing?
No, I'm great. Loving Cape Town.
Yeah? Better than Joburg?
No, not a chance.
You're not willing to say that?
No, it's way too cold here.
Yeah.
This mountain, we have better weather.
Yeah. Listen, Wayne, before we get to your current position, you're obviously at LHR. We're gonna get to that, but let's talk a little bit about the journey. You know, I mean, remembering you from back in the day, varsity. We used to, of course, our connection back then as a guy who was actually studying while I was doing what I was doing.
Yes. Yeah.
You were actually the money your parents spent for university. You went there and actually did some universitying.
Yeah, obviously. You have to,
but I mean,
did nothing but study.
No.
Yeah.
Model citizen.
Yeah, model.
Yeah.
Model student. In case my parents are watching.
Just in case this gets back to your parents.
Yeah.
Let's go back to then. I mean, your background in college. Maybe you can just take us through from college up until, you know, kind of your journey to how you got to where you are now. Maybe you can quickly run us through how that's come about.
Yeah. So I started at Falcon College.
Yeah.
Was one of those science students. So I did A-levels, like the Cambridge A-levels, where I focused on, I think my A-level subjects were chemistry, physics, and maths. And it's actually funny, I only took chemistry because my chemistry teacher hated me and they told me that I wouldn't make it in chemistry in final year. Yeah. And I almost took it as a dare to like get back at her.
And to prove a point.
Yeah, to prove a point. But anyway, so I was set on a life in sciences and went and initially studied computer science, business science here in Cape Town.
Yeah.
And then I did the switch to law, which is a bit radical from sciences. Yeah, and in my head, you know, as a naive 20-year-old, you think, yeah, you can solve all the world's problems. They're really that simple.
At that time.
Yeah. And I think if you look around the world, most people who seem to be, like in history, who have been influential have done it through law. There are not a lot of people who've changed the world historically with science degrees, except recently. Yeah. So this was before the whole tech revolution, where all the nerds now run the world.
Yeah, Elon Musk and the guys.
Yeah.
So I mean that was your sort of background, and then what did it look like after you left college? How long have you been at LHR and things like that?
Yeah, so I think straight out of my law degree, I went and did a master's at Wits in Joburg and started working at Lawyers Human Rights whilst doing the master's, and I've been there since.
And so how many years is that? Jesus,
so that's now 8 years.
You've been 8 years?
Yeah.
Does it feel like you've been doing it for 8 years? Eh?
No, it doesn't. You know, like it's, you get to this, whenever people ask, you know, like you're either at a function or you're with other people in civil society. Yeah. Like, oh my God, you know, I've been working in this field for 9 months now. I've been working in this field for 2 years. Yeah. And, you know, you're always shy to be like, oh, you know, I'm like the grandpa in this situation. Yeah, but I was fortunate because when I arrived at Lawyers Human Rights, they, you know, like I arrived then, there were a lot of veterans who had been, you know, like the lifers, the ones who like truly believe in the cause. And a lot of them had been there for close to 10 years or longer. Yeah. So I think kind of like I had a good foundation to kind of learn in, and seeing those people who had kind of dedicated their lives and who are still in the sector now, you know, it's reinforced the idea that yes, this is what I should be doing with my life. Got you, with that strong kind of mentorship, and I mean that's a pretty generic word, but there was kind of that a place for you to be incubated into, you're in the right place, and you kind of felt it straight away, kind of thing. Yeah, straight away. Yeah. You're like, this is it. Where would you say that came from, though? Is that something that came to you later maybe in academia, or when did that? Has it always been in you to go, you know, I'm just an individual that can serve the people?
You know, because that's quite something that you know, I can't imagine myself, and I want to be honest, I can't imagine myself even doing what you're doing to take it to the level where you go, I am serving the people. You know, was it early on? Have you always had that in you? What do you think?
It was probably late on. I think going through high school, I didn't think this was what I wanted to do. Certainly not the law. Like, it's the last thing that I thought I would be doing. But I came from a family of lawyers. My dad was a professor of law, and one of my uncles is a Supreme Court judge. And actually, growing up in that, I had like the opposite reaction. I will never do this. But you know, like, you learn from what you see your parents doing, not like what you see them say. You know, like
yes. Example is the best teacher.
Yeah, and I think my dad reluctantly got to a stage in his legal career where he started helping out people who, I suppose, were victims of whether it's violence, state repression. And he started, like, he kind of switched from being like this corporate lawyer and this professor to being, without the title, like this human rights lawyer or this public interest person who was trying to do good for other people. And I think that was also just out of necessity, you know, like, it's, you know, like, I'm going to quote a Marvel movie.
Oh, wow.
There's a scene in Civil War with Tony Stark and Peter Parker.
Okay, I haven't seen it, but...
Yeah, where Tony Stark goes to Peter Parker's house to try and recruit him to help. And it's actually funny because he's trying to get him to do the opposite of what Peter Parker says. And so he asks Peter, but so why do you do this? And, you know, like, Peter Parker is Spider-Man for anyone who's not a nerd. And he asks him, so why do you do this? And he then says, Peter Parker says to him, you know, like, there's a classic Ben Parker scene in all the old Spider-Man movies, you know, with great power comes great responsibility. But he said it a bit simpler because he says, if you can do what I can do and bad things are happening and you do nothing when those bad things happen, it's because, you know, like, you're at fault.
I got you. Complicit
Yeah, and there's that complicity that comes with being in a place of privilege, whether it's like your family background, your proximity to wealth, all the good schools, and your natural aptitude towards subjects and your ability to be able to do anything in life, whether it's good or bad, whether it's selfish or utilitarian, and seeing what is kind of happening outside your door and saying, that's got nothing to do with me. So I didn't think it was like, I'm like this, I thought, I'm like the superhero who has to kind of like save everyone. But after a while, you see these things happening and across the continent. And, you know, like, you then have to decide, okay, do I then just go look after me and my white picket fence and I don't look at it? And I think that's the route I initially chose.
Which is interesting. I mean, to even at our age now, I mean, we're similar ages, even to now have that sort of, because there has to be that kind of, you know, that element of whether you're religious or not, but the concept, the framework of the concept is the same, is there is an element of there is salvation in suffering, you know, and in this sense, even if I paid you R1 billion a year, let's say hypothetically, in the Tony Stark world, there is that threshold where there isn't almost enough money for the type of work you would do, because the world's problems are never over. You know what I mean? And I find that quite phenomenal, and a phenomenal thing about yourself, and you've always been so understated. But so I think that's a great place to start, Wayne. So for the layman, like myself and people out there, what actually would you say if I was to give you the generic view? I always hear it: human rights violation, human rights this. You know, like it's something which I don't know if it's sometimes used to the point where sometimes it's misused. What does it actually mean when I say you are fighting for people's human rights in the broader sense. Maybe you can unpack that for us before we get into a few other things.
Yeah, so it is a pretty
within the
generic,
framework of the Western world. I think that's important. Let's keep it in a Western. We live in a fluid, but let's for this definition say in a capitalist, Christo-Judean Western world. Maybe if I can narrow it down like that. I don't know if that's
no, that's perfect. And in fact, I think I'll probably narrow it down even further, like you look at the South African Constitution, which has a Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights applies to all people within South Africa, and the Bill of Rights guarantees very specific rights to everyone.
Sure.
So when you say you are kind of championing human rights violations, or you're fighting for people's human rights, in a South African context, you're talking about that Bill of Rights, and like to kind of and they're the minimum rights that are afforded to everyone. Like right to dignity, right to life, right to equality, right to health, right to education, right to certain procedural aspects regarding detention and criminal trials, and certain children's rights. So they're essentially those rights that accrue to everyone, and that are minimum standards for how any human should be treated.
It's set within the South African Constitution.
So, and like, you know, like there's slight variations, but you go to every country, like, it's still like those same minimum standards, and they're all similar. You know, you go to the US, you see equality as a backbone and freedom of speech, and dignity, and stuff like that. There'll be some countries which might not interpret the right to life the same way, where you'll have the death penalty, but essentially it's saying us as humans, this is how we expect to treat all other humans, and regardless of what other things we're doing, whether it's the government or whether you're interacting with people, this is a bare minimum that each human being should have. And when those start getting violated, that's where, like, we say, okay, we draw the line here, and we should be able to protect people. So from your extremes to, if we're talking about like ethnic genocide, to, you know, like muting people's ability to protest and to speak.
And now tell me, you know, for somebody like myself who is unashamedly, some people say I'm too liberal, and I'm happy to say I'm uber liberal. You know, I'm as left as it goes in most of my beliefs. You know, I'm uber liberal. So for somebody like myself who would look at it and go, wait, where does in your mind? Because human rights to me sounds like such a fantastic thing, but I look at the world I live in. You know, so like I can only tell my truth, and I say to you, Wayne, when you talk to me about these human rights. They're generally there to protect society, I would imagine, is how it would be verbalized if we were saying, like, why are human rights there? They're there to protect society. And I'm always interested in, when I look at the world I live in, the reality is I'm starting to wonder more and more. So I live in Cape Town, South Africa, okay? Divided society to the point of ridiculous. It's to the point of ridiculous. But where does society start, you know? Because I kind of feel when we say society, even though we say, I'll give you an example, okay? So let's say Table Mountain. There was a spate of crimes for a while, and that became a disaster, right? Like disaster in Newlands, where I live, in the southern suburbs as well, town. It became a disaster for, let's face it, white, wealthy South Africans. It became a disaster for the 10 people that were killed on the thing. And my thing was, because I got caught up in a rather nasty incident on the mountain as well. So it became a thing where, oh, that's a disaster, that crime. And then the language was quite concerning to me. And people asked me, because I work in the scene, to get involved, and do I want to get involved in the security thing? And I said, no, because why is this a disaster? Is it a disaster because the crime is happening to me, and I happen to be able to share a flat white with you in Sea Point, in Newlands? Now it's a disaster. But why don't you do the same thing? Why is it not a disaster in Bishop Lavis? But I've always had this notion of, does society begin at the middle class, even if we aren't expressing that? Like, do you feel that there's that element floating around? Because human rights are interesting to me, and if they are meant to serve society, where does that line where we consider people a part of this general thing, the society, where does it, in your mind, where does that start?
So I think, particularly if you look at the South African Constitution, it is the exact opposite of that. It is not meant to serve society, because society has always been exclusionary.
Sure.
It's meant to protect the individual, and a lot of times protect the individual from society.
Yeah.
I'm sure you know that famous quote about society is defined by how you treat like your weakest member, and essentially, like you almost point out a perfect definition for human rights. It's, you know, what we expect from like the weakest person in society, whether we're talking not just physically, like economically, socially, class-wise.
Yeah.
And those rights that we say we guarantee it for that individual from society. So if society comes down to bear on that individual, he is protected. And particularly the context of our constitution in South Africa, in fact, is tailored against like the kind of scenario you're talking about, where like society is a specific privileged part of society, and those rights which were entrenched, because before we had a Bill of Rights in the country, you had parliamentary sovereignty, and it was, you know, I suppose what you call kind of oppression of the majority, and by majority I mean oppression of those who have privilege. And what Bill of Rights is meant to do is equalize
so those who have
that
privilege upon those who don't have privilege. The oppression they enforce upon.
Because
most people
and that's
poor.
where society begins, right? At least that's, you know, like without defining that as society, but that's like generally speaking, each like groups of human beings, there will always be some sort of level of separation, and say, okay, this is how us as the governing body of a particular place consider, this is what we prioritize. And to be frank, in Cape Town, the priority of Cape Town administratively is the affluent areas. And so you know, you talk about the distinction between like Sea Point and Gugulethu. You talk about the service provision distinction between, you know, the waterfront and Khayelitsha. You can see there that there's like this deep inequality, which is institutionalized. Right?
Absolutely.
And so if we were to then say rights start at society, it would mean that rights start at a very specific upper class, and because of the historical and even like real day segregation of Cape Town racially, it is not just classes, but then it becomes like a racial segregation. So we're now saying society is predominantly white, and therefore rights will only accrue. But actually what the regime of Bill of Rights is meant to be saying is we're equalizing the playing field. So we take a look at the situation in like the horrible situation that you were talking about in Table Mountain, and that's a horrific thing. And what our rights say is that's horrific, that should not be happening. We should make sure that we protect those people in Table Mountain. But we should protect them as much as we're protecting people in Mitchell's Plain, as much as we're protecting people in Khayelitsha. And then the steps that you then take to protect the people at Table Mountain should in no way violate the rights of other people, right? And it's that equalizing the playing field. Okay, so now people have either been the victims of crimes in Table Mountain. It does not mean that you can then go and put in discriminatory security laws in the manner in which you protect people. So it starts to govern how society then starts to react to situations. And that is kind of like the playing field. And then let's say, for instance, we're to say, okay, there's been crime in Table Mountain. Now we're not going to let any, let's say, black people or colored people in there, or we're going to impose curfews. And it's like private, I mean, it's public land. Then you can see that now becomes rights violation. So now you have two injustices: the crime that was perpetrated, and then the broad discrimination, which starts to violate the right to people's equality and dignity. And maybe if we start saying, you think of something like in America where there's like search and frisk, which is done on a racial basis, on a class basis. Then so the point of human rights is not to have. I suppose you have this one bad thing, which is a crime, which then perpetuates other bad things.
Got you. Yeah. So you're touching on something very interesting to me, and once again, through my lens, I'm observing and I think obviously, whenever you mention capitalism, people tend to get very, very defensive, because the immediate thing is, if you even criticize capitalism as a framework, you're a socialist. We've already tried, look what happened, you're a Marxist, whereas you're going, listen, right, capitalism, because it's always been
Venezuela.
And it's Venezuela, Cuba, they immediately bring up, and capitalism is always viewed as just an economic system. But I think we forget that capitalism is also a pedagogy. It is an overarching teaching system for how we roll. So even things like human rights and laws are viewed through, in my view, a neoliberal capitalist. So are you valuable to the economy? And it's a fact that the trickle down there for me becomes, and it's something quite interesting in human rights, is when something like human law becomes a commodity. You look at Oscar Pistorius, right? Even him not getting a life sentence, he had the money to buy the best lawyers, right? And in the spirit of the law, the man's guilty, isn't he? I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but
he was found guilty.
Yes, but he bought a level of justice, And how do we preclude ourselves from power, right? Being able to have, clearly their power had a hand on justice, if you know what I'm saying, And the society's human rights, because we need to be able to believe in the systems that apply our human rights, right? And there you go, like, my God, the power's clearly got its hand. That shouldn't happen, And for you working in the practice, and especially working where you work, are these things that you're facing to go, economy, money, power, shouldn't dabble in that. State and economy shouldn't be synonymous. Capitalism, basically what I'm saying is, how do we avoid a world where capitalism and, I guess in inverted commas, democracy are seen as synonymous? Because I think that could be quite dangerous to our human rights. Because most people are poor.
Yes.
I mean, Aristotle basically said, back in the day, they would have it, as you know very well, is governance was a lottery system. And then the bourgeois thought, no, this is a bad system. Because so it's almost like now we're going back to that capitalism. So basically what I'm saying is, does that worry you? And are these conversations that are happening, that capitalism and democracy and law shouldn't be seen as synonymous, And
yes. Well, and maybe use the Oscar example. The problem with Oscar is not that he got a special justice because of money. The problem with Oscar is that he alone gets his rights vindicated. So, technically speaking, obviously, for society and for the family, you look at a situation where someone allegedly kills another individual and only gets 6 years. What he did with his lawyer was he vindicated all the rights that accrue to him in terms of the Bill of Rights and in terms of the legal system to ensure that it looked favorably and holistically towards his situation, so that he got those 6 years. Which, technically speaking, as him as an individual, is fine, even if we probably are not happy about it. But the bigger problem is that you look through his trial where he got every single right of his ticked, and that's great, because that's exactly what his lawyer is meant to do. It's exactly what the justice system is meant to do for everyone, right? Whether or not that sentence was a correct one, but him being able to say everything he did and pull out every legal principle he did is what's meant to happen, but it's meant to happen to everyone. So now the problem is not so much that Oscar bought justice, it's just that Oscar brought justice that is not flowing to everyone else.
Gotcha.
And so that laid off driver who hasn't fed his family in 2 months because he hasn't got his salary, who goes and commits a petty crime like stealing foundation or formula for his kid, will get the same rights fully vindicated for him. The guy who has allegedly committed fraud because he used an ID he didn't know was fraudulent, or someone copied his ID, and now has been stuck in remand prison for 8 months before his trial has been called. You know, he should have been able to get bail on the first day for an even lesser crime as Oscar did, and had that whole situation cleared up as well. So now what the problem is now is not so much that those rights are there for Oscar to exploit, is that those rights are not filtering to everyone, because the justice system requires skilled practitioners for people to get them, and the legal system is such that that requires capital for you to be able to get the services, and the legal system is also set up such that if you do not have that lawyer to vindicate you because of the amount of traffic that goes in, you will not have those rights vindicated. And so what we're really talking about now is how we start to equalize access to justice away from capital. But now what you're talking about is like taking away our profession, right? Or allowing our profession to cover everyone. And this is something that we try to do, like in the legal NGO sphere. It's essentially our job is let us provide the same quality services to marginalized individuals, vulnerable communities, and indigent people, as you know, like your big corporates and everyone with money will get from your big firms, and I won't drop any of their names, not to be disparaging. They do a very good job for all their clients, and they do pro bono work, but then logically, because they're making money, the majority of their clients are people with money. So it's just, now that is something that as a society we have to figure out. Right?
Okay. Because basically where I'm coming from, and I think what you've labeled beautifully there and outlined, framed beautifully, is that the ultimate nihilist position, I feel, is when ultimately human rights for me and law and are one thing, become commoditized or commodified. Then we have a serious problem, right? Because as with most things within the framework of capitalism, and to an extent, I guess we are a fluid economic state. I'm not going to say we're purely, but we are, you know, if it becomes commodified and under a neoliberal society, then people cease to be people, and you only deserve human rights and law if you're rich. And that's because that's ultimate nihilism, isn't it? For me, like if we go there, what's the logical conclusion? You know, if once again the people who are meant to be protected, like you said, from the nation state, can't afford it.
Yeah, and so you know, like the different ways in which, so you know, like we now start to talk about how we get right, because obviously we've adopted a colonial capitalist framework for how we govern society. And if you look at our past traditional structures of your indigenous people, they, you know, like a lot of villages, a lot of communities used to have chieftains and kings and these traditional courts where you'd have one person who would sit and who would judge, you know, like what you call our alternative dispute mechanisms, which kind of took away the idea of power. I'm not saying they were incorruptible, but at least, you know, like they put everyone on a level playing field. And we have some systems that our justice system has tried to incorporate. You think of your equality courts, you think of your at the CCMA, at the bargaining council, you think of your small claims court. There are certain areas where legal representation is either specifically precluded to put people at a level playing field, but ultimately in all those different spheres, someone with money can always then jump to the next stage. You know, like if an employee wins at the CCMA, you can appeal to the Labour Court, and it's the Labour Court now, it's a High Court now, you bring in your advocates, and now, you know, so so, you know, we're still at this shaky place where we're trying to level the playing field in certain areas, but we aren't quite there yet. And I'm not saying I have the solution. I think there's also not enough knowledge within the populace, particularly your poor people, or people who are not as economically powerful, about the other alternative justice options that they have. And some of these courts are actually quite successful. There's you know, like there's a topic generally about our judiciary, and I think there's certain levels in the judiciary where like, no doubt you need money to kind of access them. And those with money, particularly where there's a lot of traffic, like the criminal justice system, particularly, you know, like is a place with deep inequality and is really classist. But a lot of our courts are very progressive, and they're very progressive to the rights of poor people. It's just, you know, how do poor people get to that doorstep? Our Court has had amazing judgments protecting and vindicating the rights of marginalized communities and trying to equalize things. But I mean, how many cases can a Court which sits once see? And to get there, you already need like you know, a very good litigation lawyer. And there are only so many pro bono litigation lawyers in the country. So it's, how do we then start to filter down legal services to poor people so that they all have lawyers? And then because we're in a capitalist system, right? What we say is our whole system is, okay, if you want to make money, right, the more money you'll make, the most money you make is dependent on who you work for and who pays you. So if you're doing pro bono work and you're working for poor people, you're not going to make money. So if you become very good at something, you will obviously, so like if I'm a very good car maker, or I'm a very good welder, I'm a very good plumber, I will charge the highest services, and then the people who will come and get me are those who can to do that. And that's fair, because you're saying, I've gone and I've perfected my skill, and I am delivering a certain quality, and therefore you pay this much. So now, what are the people who are either accepting like what poor people can pay, or doing pro bono work, would invariably not be people who would be able to charge a lot. Right, because we're not saying they're the cream of the crop, they've got the most experience. Unless obviously, you know, like they're all utilitarian and
most people,
generally speaking, the system would be your best lawyers will be the most expensive, and we know this. Your what we call senior counsel and advocates, they're the ones who charge the most, invariably, so are like the hardest to get, and they're normally briefed by your big firms, and they're normally briefed by the people who pay the most. So to get a senior counsel to be doing a pro bono matter, a lot of pro bono matters, and regularly representing
the man on the street.
Man of the street. The economics of capitalism just does not allow that.
And I think once again, you know, I think this thing of everybody freaking out as soon as you start saying, guys, we need to examine capitalism for a few reasons. But here, I think within your sphere, I'm sure you see it bold-faced, that, you know, there are certain locked-in gridiron things that leave out most people from even having the thing we talk about as justice. And I appreciate you unpacking it like this. I want to move on to, obviously, an interesting part of justice. And I think I would say, okay, we're in South Africa, but within any third world country or developing nation, I believe is now the term, violence, right? And I think this is probably something you might experience. And people always think of violence as stab, shoot, you know what I mean? Whereas maybe we can open up on violence in terms of you at LHR, what type of violences are you seeing besides you would deal with. I know at a stage, I remember you were dealing with sort of the immigration sort of challenges, if you can call it that, and downright xenophobia in South Africa.
Yes.
Like, let's not be, I don't want to beat around the bush. Xenophobia in South Africa, appalling xenophobia in South Africa. Now, that for me is a form of violence before people are even beating the people. So maybe we can get into how you sort of deal with explaining to people that violence isn't the end product of me being tied up on Table Mountain. That's not just the only type of violence, and it's not the only brutality that exists. It's demeaning somebody, and like you said, no dignity is a form of violence, which I believe, through my eyes, is inherent in the system.
Yes. So,
and I may be wrong. I mean, I'm happy to hear your.
Yeah, the thing is, we do have in our common law here a crime of criminal injuria, right? And that's a criminal statute, and it is essentially, like doing something, diminishing someone's dignity.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, like those kind of crimes are, the wounds from those crimes last longer and are more difficult to kind of deal with.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we've seen now, we live in a world of social media. We know like there's a lot of cyberbullying with children.
Yes, yes.
And we've seen a lot of suicides that happen at a level where people are, like there's some sort of cyberbullying.
Yes, yes, yes.
We've seen suicides with certain vulnerable groups, if we're talking about the LGBTI community.
Yes.
Where that exclusion from a space. And now, like there might not, a lot of whether, or if it's like where there's no physical violence that's been visited upon you.
Yes.
But your very existence is questioned.
Yeah, yeah.
And it can be across the stream, like whether we're talking about transphobia, Islamophobia, like hatred towards people of certain gender, xenophobia, and since we're in Cape Town, like just racism, generally,
and unashamed racism. The thing about Cape Town, a lot of people don't want to talk about. Here, it's unashamed. It's like we will preclude you, and it's not a secret. Like, and I think people are uncomfortable with this, but you can say what you want about being liberal. Yeah. It's clear. You've acted. You are precluded.
Yes.
The walls are getting higher. The rent is getting higher. Like and I'd be interested to hear what you think. Is the preclusive measures, which are often economic, are experienced as violence if you're not a part of that system?
Yes, and I mean, there's that recent FNB scandal where they charged high rates to low-income black people, right? And it's funny, that's like a common story here in Cape Town, and I'm sure we've all heard like the stories of like when you speak with your black friends, specifically those who've kind of lived in both Cape Town and Joburg, and that distinction. And as someone who was in Cape Town like for a long time before I moved to Joburg, and like there was this phobia of Joburg.
Yep.
And then you go live in Joburg, and then you come back to Cape Town. You can feel it, like you can physically feel like like it is not a space for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's unashamed.
Yes.
It's unashamedly.
And the interactions. Yeah. And, and we're people who have like a certain privilege and certain social capital where we can almost maneuver in Cape Town and in like all of South African society a lot easier, because whether it's the privilege that we had in terms of the schools we went to, our interaction with people, even our kind of proximity to white culture because of the way you speak.
Yeah, and assimilation.
Yes, and that assimilation. And even then, like there's still that, it just feels like so... It's visceral in Cape Town.
It's
and it's weird because, you know, like it's not something that people want to talk about, and you know, like people will say, no, you're using the race card and all these other things. But it's, and you know, like, I mean, just practically speaking, you go look at an geographical aerial map of Cape Town, and you see how it's demarcated. You can see what's happening, right? It's
that's
literal,
deliberate.
Deliberate segregation
Absolutely.
that happened, right? But as a result of that, right, when I remember actually, this is where like one of my experiences here was when I was a first year. And you know, like you at first year, you go up campus, you kind of go down from Jamie Stairs, you know the Rosebank area, and you know everyone in and around. And then I once got on a taxi and I went, you know, like I went into town, and you know, like I was thinking, you know, like I didn't really get that far. Like as soon as you leave the campus area, suddenly I can't see any black people. Right? And then, you know, like it's in the back of your mind, you're a kid, you don't know anything. Then one day I was meant to take a taxi to Claremont, where we are now, from Rosebank, and I kind of got, or from Rondebosch, and I kind of got absent-minded. I forgot where I was going, past Wynberg, and I ended up in Guguletu, right? And imagine, and then suddenly, so this is my first viewing of Guguletu, and then you're like, whoa.
Yeah.
So, you know, in my mind, I actually got to a point where I'm like, maybe there are actually no black people in this town. Right. And it was like so visceral, because what happens is, you know, like obviously I had to get off that taxi, because then you have to go get another taxi which is going the other way. And I'm like there in these, you know, the shacks that they had, and a lot of them were like not even taller than me. And I suppose I was still growing then, so I don't know if I was even as tall as I am now. And this plane flies over, right? And the ground shakes, because it's like near where, and like the, you know, those old asbestos.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean.
And they're all shaking, and like this is existence for people. And, you know, obviously, like this kind of shows my own privilege, like the fact I was like, how do people live here? And then I was like, you know, because you arrive here and this place is spectacular, there's a mountain, everything seems nice, and then on campus there's all these activities, you know, like everyone is like, they seem liberal, they seem, you know, there's always like this party atmosphere, you feel like you can do anything you want.
Absolutely.
And then you're like, oh, Cape Town is the best city in the world, right?
Sure.
You know, like everyone thinks that.
Yeah.
And then from that day on, I was just like, my God, what is this place, right? And then, you know, like I actually didn't think about it a lot until then went and stayed in Joburg. And I really wasn't a fan of Joburg, because, you know, like if you come from Cape Town, you have your views of Joburg.
Of course.
And Joburg is far from a perfect city. There's like so much inherently, it's a perfect visualization of like South Africa as a state.
Absolutely.
All the good and all the bad.
And
on
like
steroids.
This,
And then you come back to Cape Town, and particularly come back to Cape Town without the shelter of the varsity campus.
Yes.
And you just, you know, like that visceral, like othering that you feel.
Yes.
Like you're an outsider in a society that doesn't want you. And it's, like you say, it's unashamedly so how people interact with you. How, and you know, like it's both explicit and implicit. You might get direct racial slurs, or you might just get people who are angry at you, or who will visibly treat you differently from everyone else. And then, or you might have the people who, you know, like they will, you know, like I suppose who might jokingly, oh, here, you know, like, oh, here's our clever black.
And you're like, a black guy.
You're a clever
one. Why can't everyone be like you?
Or why can't they use you as like a token for their jokes? Like, oh, you're here. You know, like, and so at every corner, even those who, I suppose, will not even be trying, or who in their minds will not think they're trying to be, you know, like, I don't want to say racist, but othering and excluding you from the space, will still do it by their behavior, right? And I suppose it's just because there are no, like, the segregation has been so intense that
it's normalized. The thing is, for me, it's almost that's normalized, that even if you see a black person who, you know, like you and me, as you say, we can assimilate and move out, assimilate. I can feel what a shock it is to them because some, you know, that you can almost feel the conversation start up here, and then as you, like, you know, even something as you talk rugby and cricket with guys, you can feel the mood dissipate, or those fences dissipate, and people don't realize this. But you know, we're talking about violence, but what a lot of people don't understand, and I'm sure what you have to deal with, is to keep explaining to people that violence is experienced by poor people constantly.
Yes.
Like constantly. Just because he's not getting shot at home, he's still poor.
Yes.
Like, hunger is a version of violence, and you know, I'm unashamed in saying, because I'm a part of the bourgeois, I mustn't lie.
Yeah.
That within capitalism, most people experience violence because most people are poor.
Yes.
Not just here, in the world.
Yeah.
And so you know, violence to me, Wayne, is such an interesting thing. And there was an interesting case. I think we're actually coming at you were saying to me, I remember, I think it was yesterday.
Yeah.
It popped up on your phone or something, and maybe we can get into that article.
Yeah, sure.
And let's get into why is that what is it, firstly? Talk me through the case and what the judgment is, and why you feel it's a landmark case. I'd love to hear it from your side.
Yes, so we have an amazing land and housing program. They do phenomenal work helping out all sorts of different communities.
Is this at LHR?
Yes, this is at Lawyers Human Rights.
Yep.
And what they did was, so there's an issue about how we treat homeless people, and this is a global issue, really.
Yeah.
But I'll just stick to South Africa for now. And what happens, again, because there's this exclusion from society, right? What has always happened has always happened in this capitalist and previously apartheid racist society, is that, you know, there's been this, what used to be racial segregation and has now turned into classist segregation. Yeah. And what happens is you have a lot of people who are in and part of that community who, of our big towns, who are homeless for whatever reason. Some might have been trying to seek work, or some might have lost their jobs, or you know, like, they just never found any footing in society and never assimilated into you know, neoliberal capitalist society.
Yeah, which is a hell of a complex thing.
Yeah, and then they, in this situation, these homeless people erected, you know, like an open space, their own shelters, and they had their belongings, and they were forcibly evicted.
Yeah.
And what happened?
Where was this in particular?
So this is in Johannesburg.
Yes. Let's just, because some people may not have seen this. So where in Joburg?
I mean, I couldn't quote you the exact place, but it was somewhere close to Alexandria, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
And the JMPD, the police, basically came and one night just took all their belongings, destroyed all their belongings. So it's literally because they didn't want the homeless people in a particular area.
Yeah.
So they destroyed their belongings and what they had and what allowed them to live there.
Yeah.
As a way to forcibly evict them. So normally when you evict someone from a particular area, right, you'll come and serve an eviction notice, and then maybe you'll have the sheriff come and move you out, and then someone else can occupy the land. Yeah. But now, because the people are inherently homeless, they regularly, so like imagine you're under a bridge, you always go to that bridge, and you've been there for a long time, and then you've built yourself certain areas so that when you're existing in that bridge, you can shelter yourself from the cold, and it is a place where you come back. And so the police will just come and take everything.
Yeah.
Your temporary shelters, your little belongings that you have, your structures. It is, like the most insane type of violence.
Sure.
It's, to us, the equivalent of, this is your nice, beautiful home. Someone comes and takes down, demolishes all the roof, the walls, takes your bed, your sofa, cuts down all these trees, the pool. And, and then barricades the place. So this is no longer a home or a shelter for you.
Sure.
And so whilst it's not legally an eviction, it's a form of eviction through the violence of depossession. And the case went to the Supreme Court of Appeal, and we got a judgment recently, and by we, I mean the organization, through the hard work of the Land and Housing Unit.
Okay. Of LHR.
Of LHR.
Yeah. Lawyers for Human Rights, for those who don't know.
Yes. And this judgment basically awarded damages for the violence that was affected, and set out the unlawful nature of actions like this. And so actions like this are now inherently unlawful and can lead to punitive measures taken. I mean, the quantums were not great, but at least there's a very clear legal standard that's set out, which can now be upheld. And what obviously you hope in a democratic society is that now that it's clear that actions like that by the state are unlawful, it is something that is then transmitted to the state and all its law enforcement agencies, so that they know they cannot do that.
That's
and they cannot visit that violence. But I mean, that's the most literal capitalist violence. It's, you're poor, we don't want to see you here. And it's not like we're locking you up and taking away from here. We are destroying your ability to be here, that we can kind of uphold, the social status quo. You should not be here.
You don't represent an example of what we would like to see ourselves as, so you must go. And this is called a for those that are interested in looking the term up, it's called necropolitics, And necropolitics, for those who don't know, I know you're a learned man, but it's almost violence, which is it's the law of the walking dead, basically. It's to say, okay, violence against these people is okay. And being a black middle class South African myself, I'm becoming more and more aware that necropolitics is actually, of course, it is still racial purely in South Africa by its divide, but it's a classist thing, because even people that live in have proximity to power and wealth go, oh, the violence that's happening over there, and there's nothing worse for me, and I'm the most critical person, and I'm in my spiritual journey, and I have to find a way to make it work. I'm aware where I am. I'm complicit. I don't get to play the double game. I think they call it political purity. To say, I'm going to have these theories that will never be tested, so I can never be wrong, really, So I'm aware, and I'm looking to, this is why people like yourself inspire me to keep asking myself questions, is, my proximity to power, which just by living where I live, by living with the people I live with even, the people that I can talk to, the people I can WhatsApp on my phone, what am I doing with that, Is it just for my political, for my capitalist ends? Is that it? Is it just my friends, look at me, I live in the southern suburbs? Or do I say, as the great Zygmunt Bauman used to say, and says in all his writing, is no state is ever just enough. No state is ever just enough, and privileged people need to hear that, and that one doesn't go, in my eyes, to in South Africa's context, white people.
Yes.
That one we need to hear as black, upper middle class. No state is ever just enough. And we, my criticism will always be of my people the most. That's the state I want to be in. Is to say, this is the infancy, guys. And there is violence happening to our people, and you are complicit. Listen, we are all living our lives. We are all slave is too emotive a word, locked in the system called capitalism. We all do have to do these things we have to do. But to what end? To what end? Do we need 5 houses in Bryanston if you're first generation black? Do you? You know, and this is probably a more complex conversation that we can have, but you know, Wayne, I find myself, you said this wonderful case, and we'll chat about it a bit more later, says to me, it's something I've been struggling with for a long time, and within the nation state, for me, is getting better and better at violence, and that worries me. Across the world, nation state is getting so, at being punitive, is getting better and better, and it's almost a crime to be poor.
Yes, and I think, you know, like that term is like perfect because it's the criminalization of poverty.
Yeah.
But it's more than that. It's the engineering and criminalization of poverty.
So that violence is inherent in
yes. And, you know, like where it begins, right? Because that's exactly what these discriminatory regimes were all about. Yeah. And you look at your apartheid, right? Yeah. That's exactly, it was a measure of control. Like part of what it was, you know, it was not just about racial hatred and racial exclusion, yeah. Right? It was a mixture of racial hatred, racial exclusion, but also market forces.
Yes.
It's, you go, because, you know, like capitalism, you know, like without kind of delving into the whole theory of capitalism too much, but yes. It works through depossession.
Yes.
Right. It's someone has to be exploited for you to have so much that you don't really, kind of haven't really earned, you haven't really worked for.
Yes.
You have to have taken it from someone.
Absolutely.
Whether it's, you know, like how the violence that was visited upon the natives when the Europeans landed in America.
Yeah.
Even the violence that, you know, like, and not to be hypocritical and just kind of look at colonial violence, that was also a part of African culture, the violence that Shaka would visit on other tribes.
That,
yeah, and take their stuff.
Yeah.
So what it is, so, and what the last regime did was say, okay, we, you know, like South Africa has all this mineral resources, it's got all these riches that can be exploited, whether it's extractives or whether it's agriculture.
Yeah.
How can we make sure that a small few can exploit it and benefit from it?
Yeah.
Right? And simply saying, okay, we will just kick everyone away and you'll be there and we will then have this land to reap. That's not how it works, right?
Yeah,
because you then still have to work the land.
Sure.
But so what you do is you say, okay, we will exclude you from the areas where you can benefit.
Yes.
And then exclude you from the areas where you can educate yourself, but then be punitive. And you know, there used to be these taxes in apartheid. You now stay in desolate areas where you are put into poverty,
yes.
And that forces you then to be a laborer in the system. So you then come in. So it wasn't just about saying, okay, black people, you have your own land there.
Yeah.
It was about putting black people in a situation where they can come and serve the interests and be that workforce labor.
Yeah.
After ensuring that they have no other options.
Yeah.
And that's how it feeds. And that's what we still see now. And, you know, it's obviously inherently, because of the inequality, still largely on a racial level, because you kind of haven't really had a lot of transformation.
Yeah.
But what we do is we try, the reason why there's such an effort to criminalize poverty and it's criminalize access to affluency that has not been earned, so that, you know, you're meant to be over there in Alexandria and Gugulethu, and if we see you here, you will be punished. Make sure you go back to where you are, and you can come through when it's time for you to work.
On our time.
Yes.
Yeah, when we need your energy.
Yeah. And so, because, you know, you think of Oranje, I'm sure you've heard of Oranje.
I've been to Oranje, actually.
Yeah. And, you know, like, as wonderful a place as you know, like some right-wingers would think.
Yeah, it's got its own economy.
Yeah, the reason why, like, you know, it's not like this expanding idea is because Orania, it is like pure exclusion, right?
Yep.
And that doesn't, you know, like that's almost like built on, to be frank, racial hatred.
Yeah.
Without thinking through the shortcomings of market labor.
Yeah.
And so, you know, like if you're sitting there and you're thinking, oh, Orania is a great place, we'll not see any black people. Okay, I have to do my own laundry, I have to dig my own. Is Orania such a nice place? You know, like, can I really, you know?
Yeah.
That's why we migrated from Europe.
Yeah.
We're laborers here, you know, like
Yeah.
you know, like, am I really going to work that field? I have to go cook my own supper. I have to,
It's not like,
you know, like, no, I think I can be a bit more progressive. It is not economically viable for me to be like that racist.
And when I think I'd like to go back probably to something which you know only too well and has taken a lot of your time. Once again, the you know, the xenophobic trials, and it's a complex. Xenophobia is complex. Okay,
Yeah.
we as though we don't have enough macro and micro socio-economic issues just within South African tribalism, which people are still killing each other for today in 2019. Please don't think that's over. I'm from Limpopo. My mother's from Limpopo. There's Xhosa tribes, even within the Xhosa tribes themselves, there are people who still kill each other because he's from another tribe. That's happening now, by the way. But then, when we get to something like xenophobia, and I think you got into the lawyers for human rights at the time when it really started to use an economic term, the boom of it. Let's maybe, if we can, unpack a little bit of what you saw as xenophobia in the context of South Africa, and you've lived throughout Africa, whether it's unique to here, and what's happening in xenophobia. I'm always so interested. What's going on there? Why? I'm South African, so I only experience it from a South African point of view. What's happening in your eyes as somebody who was in the belly of the beast?
Yeah, so I mean, this is, you know, like, this is a global thing.
Yeah.
And I think so it's the same with tribalism. Every people, every group have a certain arrogance that they have as being better than other groups.
Yeah.
And particularly, you look at groups that have had violence kind of pushed against them, and by that, you know, like, I'm using your broad definition of colonialism, apartheid.
Yeah.
They, like, a lot of those systems, the reason why, for instance, we had, you look through Africa, and sorry, I'm going to start very big because this is literally where it comes from, right? A lot of the ways in which colonialism worked was through what we call divide and conquer.
Yeah.
And I mean, your most tragic example being in Rwanda, where you had a minority Tutsi tribe who were a certain ethnicity, more light-skinned, who were given dominion and given more economic and social power over the majority Hutu tribe. And that division allows for better control because the group is ununited, and like, the quarrels will happen with each other. And we saw the same thing in Kenya in the 2009 election, where there was a lot of tribal violence with that election, which is it Kibaki won in very controversial terms.
And it's on paper.
And there was a lot of rhetoric around the different tribes. And so, you know, like, I don't know if it is purely a legacy of colonialism, but certainly colonialism throughout Africa fueled a division of Africans to perpetuate colonial goals.
Yes.
And that's something that's something that's never, you know, like, with liberation or independence or the end of colonial rule, that just doesn't kind of ebb away.
Yeah.
and societies have had to deal with this, and this is something that we deal with in South African society.
Sure.
And an extension of that is, so you almost the African psyche through colonialism has always been to fear and hate the other.
Yeah.
And so you'll have these tribal wars between, Sotho people and Zulu people, or
whatever it may be.
Yeah, whatever it may be. And then it extends to, okay, so because we're protecting what's ours from you, right? And then now as a collective, you then have other Africans will come in. And because we've almost have this psyche, because when you talk xenophobia, right? Like at its root, it's not really xenophobia, it's Afrophobia, right? If we're frank, it's not, you will not see, it's not like there's this hatred of Europeans. No. It's not a hatred of Americans, and it's a hatred of your fellow Africans, and that's kind of what has been taught. And then it's been perpetuated, obviously, by political leaders and their rhetoric.
So I just want to kind of unpack that. So we've been almost programmed to go, white skin has value. So they're a foreign national. We're not even going to refer to them as foreigners. They are foreign nationals. So of course they bring value. That's presumed. Like, of course they bring value.
Yeah, and kind of goes back to that violence you're talking about. Like if we're now talking about what Steve Biko was trying to teach, and if we kind of take it across the Atlantic, what Fanon, what we were taught was to hate ourselves. And I say we were, it's what we still are.
100%.
Right. You look at the media we consume, the education that we have. It is still...
By we, you're referring to black people en masse.
Black people en masse. Is you are still everything in... A lot of things in society are telling you, are grading your value. And from the institutional discrimination that you have, your culture is worth nothing. You're the erase, how our history has been erased. And your value in society. So, for instance, us in private school who can go and speak a certain way, we can navigate society easily. My friend who will come down from Limpopo, who did not get that same privilege and had to learn English himself here, that's violence. Even from all the way to your skin color, your proximity to whiteness. You'll see it in media, you'll see which models are taken, your representation in culture, and representation in culture in that, will you see yourself in magazine covers, will you see yourself in TVs, movies,
100%.
And how will you see people who look like you portrayed? And the overriding thing will be the portrayal of such people in a negative light. Even if you look through, like you read, like even our religious books, like this light over darkness, the kind of description of the Philistines, you have like black people, a whole continent of black people praying to a white Jesus and a white God.
Blonde, he lived in the
blonde,
Middle East.
Blue-eyed from Middle East.
And in the Nubian times.
So where technically you worship a God that came from people who look like you, but you will have a picture of that God with looking blonde, blue-eyed, and pale. With no. And that's your, like, there's no way that doesn't affect your psyche.
Absolutely.
Right. Absolutely. And you think, so for instance, West Africa, like there are a lot of countries where like 99% of the population is Christian. Worshipping a blonde, blue-eyed God. And they're all dark-skinned. Or what they perceive to be a blonde, blue-eyed God when he shouldn't be. And I point to an imaginary painting, but there's nothing there.
It would be up there.
It's topical. If you not to go too deep into that. Hopefully no one understands the subtlety.
Yeah, let's...
And sorry, to bring it back to xenophobia now. So now that is it, right?
Yeah.
And it is political. It's the easiest political fuel now for anyone. You know, like you'll see, like with Trump, you'll see in Europe with all Brexit.
Absolutely.
All the easy message to sell is they're coming to get us, and the imaginary they, because you then actually don't have to do anything to protect from the they, because they're not there.
Yeah.
Right. They're coming to get us. Vote me in. I'll protect you from they.
Yes.
They being anyone who doesn't look like you.
Yeah.
Obviously in Europe, like it's the foreigners, it's the East. And you know, like for them, the foreigners are the Eastern Europeans who are different, who
physique, facial structure,
and skin, you know, like they're darker.
Yeah.
And the African migrants,
yes.
right? Because they're like, we don't like these foreigners, you know, there's French people. Oh, we love you, French people. We're talking about foreigners, you know. And, you know, like it's the same thing with Trump and his stupid wall and the Mexicans. And then, you know, the same Trump will be talking about my dad, Fred Trump, was born in Germany, even though he was born in New York. And like, but you're selling yourself as a foreigner, but you're saying we don't want foreigners.
Yeah.
You know, like so now it's clear what the foreigner represents, and it is a message that has been streamed internationally through media. There's a distinction of foreigner as being people of color. Yeah. Right, and you know, like the intense Islamophobia. Right, which then manifests as xenophobia because of like it is so pervasive. You know, obviously we consume a lot of American media, but you know, like if you've ever been to America and actually, you know, like we kind of consume the diluted version.
Very much so.
It is shocking, you know, when you hear, like so I was in New York and I'm in this cab, you know, it almost felt like, you know, imagine what you'd hear in Germany and their propaganda against the Jews. Yeah. Right. You think, how is this legal? How are you allowing such? It is hate speech, direct hate speech against Muslim people. Yeah. But it's got to a stage where it has been, you know, we're now indifferent to it. And this is, you know, like when you speak to violence, you know, when that Christchurch guy starts shooting up a church. That is not where the violence began. The violence began when it became so normalized to speak about Islam in such a derogatory way, where, you know, like even through media, you know, like and you know, like not to kind of imply that we're racist, but imagine you're in a plane and someone gets up and says Allah Akbar. Yeah. Right. We are conditioned to think that that's a precursor for...
Absolutely. Something's about to go down. It's 9/11 all over again.
Allah Akbar is God is great. Yeah. That is all that is saying.
Yeah.
Islam is, like, for people who understand it, and I'm not Muslim, but Islam is inherently a religion. You know, its tenets are built around... You know, like, it's similar to Ubuntu. It's built around peace and togetherness. And the media has distorted it to be this hostile religion, and it has been sold as this hostile religion everywhere. And I mean, like, so many prominent politicians in the West, and like people who a lot of people ordinarily listen to in the Western world speak about it in that manner.
It's normalized.
Yes. Yeah. And I think like one of the best examples is John Mccain, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, John McCain is now in the divided world of America on the right. Yeah. He's now seen as this hero, and it's, you know, like it's very tragic that he eventually died. I suppose he lived a decent life. Yeah. When he was debating Barack, when there were the two nominees from the two parties, he had someone come, you know, like he's saying out his policies, and someone comes out and says to him, you know, but Barack is, what's it called? You know, Obama, he's like this Muslim heathen, whatever.
Yeah.
And
he stood
up and he stopped him. And, you know, like, he was praised so much for this because he stopped the guy and he said, you know, we have our disagreements, but Barack is not Muslim.
Yeah.
Right? Not, there's nothing wrong with Muslim people, but no, in other words, do not disparage Barack by calling him Muslim.
Yeah. But it's normal. Okay. Yeah. We'll praise you for that.
And so, like, that is, so, like, and sorry to kind of have this long-winded thing about it, you know, going back to xenophobia. You have to understand, xenophobia does not start with, you know, King Zwelithini saying, like, bad things. It is so deeply entrenched in all of society.
Deliberately as well.
Deliberately.
People must stop thinking that these tragedies are deliberate. And listen, it goes back to Grecian times. Anybody who's willing to go back, like you're saying, xenophobia is not a new thing. It is a structural part of socio-political, quite frankly, structuring. And structuring is deliberate.
Yes.
People mustn't say this is how it works out. No, it's deliberate. So politicians know what they're doing. It's calculated. You know, power is such a drug for most of these politicians. You know, and so Wayne, I mean, we'll probably move it on, and I think we've had such a powerful conversation. I'd probably like to talk a little bit about LHR, just a little bit. Obviously, that's where you spend most of your life and most of your time, and exactly what you guys are outlining, and if anybody sees this and they're like, oh wow, I'd love to put them in touch with, because you're an NGO, right? And how you are able to do this unbelievable work is through what measures?
Yeah, so, I mean, so obviously our mission statement is essentially realizing constitutional rights for vulnerable and marginalized communities, that access to justice that I was talking about, for poor people. So it's almost, in a way, is combating poverty and how poverty excludes people from society.
Got you.
Which inherently means, you know, we're doing pro bono work, so obviously none of our clients pay anything for what we do. So to be able to get the funds to be able to go and vindicate people's rights, whether they're homeless people, whether it's communities affected by mining, whether it's a case we actually had today in Pretoria. I was getting updates from my candidate attorneys. It's actual police officers in Pretoria Station who are alleged victims of racial abuse. It's important because the attorney is kicking up a fuss for us helping out police officers.
So the police officers are themselves?
Yes. So you can see the violence. They are our clients. So this is within the Pretoria Police Station.
Yes.
There were a group of women police officers, reservists, so like the lowest rank there.
Yes.
And they had a commanding officer who racially abused them using and I'm not sure what your censoring of words are, but using the K word.
No. In fact, no.
Yeah.
So I must address that. I don't understand why no one can say gaffer, because who's it protecting? I already know. So I've always wondered why people say the N or the K word. It's, hey, just say gaffer, because it's once again, it's that thing of white people shouldn't be viewed like that. Like, no, that exists and you understand what's happening there. Just because you don't want to hear that about yourself. No, so I have no censoring about that. I believe that shouldn't be censored, and it makes me sick every time people have to say the N word. It's like, hey, the only people that you're protecting there is the people that use the words.
Yes.
Because black people are like, what? Does my dad not know what you're saying? No, he heard it, and now it's the time you need to hear what happened. And it didn't happen like N-word. It's nigger. It's gaffer. So no.
So allegedly what this guy did was he came, and there are a number of cases. Right. But in this particular case, he came and just said, hey, you kafir, come here, and then give me your uniform, and other explicit in the view of other officers. And he is alleged to have done this before, and he had 2 cases opened against him. And so we assisted the clients in the second case, and we finally got it on the roll, and the prosecution is finally moving forward. Right. And so you can imagine, like, just the reality of that. You have police officials who are meant to protect the rights of other people, but they're black police officials who have to come to an NGO, right? Government workers in mass, and they even had their union rep, and who come and say, this is our work situation in our office. And we actually realize it's a systemic issue. It's not just in Pretoria. And like the violence that they have to survive. And then you think, but so, you know, like you think of anywhere, right? You think, okay, if something bad happens to me, what am I going to do? I'm going to call the police. Now, imagine you're the police, and you're like,
where do I go?
Yeah, like, I cannot vindicate my rights. I've gone, I've opened this in-house, I've opened a case, and just the societal structure just does not allow for me to be protected. We obviously have the social capital to, you know, like, we're then like that Oscar Pistorius vehicle to vindicate all his rights. And we can go and say,
no more. Because that's violence.
And that push that we give, you know, like, we shouldn't be there. Like, we shouldn't have to give a push to police officials who protect other people's rights. But we find ourselves doing that. And so we gave a push, and the wheels of justice began moving. And, you know, like, even that in itself is, that should not be our profile of client, but that is how deeply groups in our society have been precluded by society. You know, like, so when you say, where does society start? It does not even start with people, black police officers who are women, who will just not be given their justice. They need that push that, you know, like Oscar will get from Barry Roo? You know, like, he's such a parody now on social media. I'm always like, is that still him? You know, because now I'm like, if I'm saying Barry Roo, am I giving a shout out to Advocate Barry Roo, whoever he is, you know, like the
parody account. Oh, it's hilarious. No, Wayne, you know, it's it is something, you know, as I try and imagine if people where I live in the southern suburbs of Cape Town, in the Atlantic seaboard, realize that every time the black people who come and clean your house, who come and dig your garden, every time they go home and walk past your electric fences, every time they see your Maserati, every time they see these things that you normalize as having for your working harder, is a form of violence. And, you know, Wayne, I'd love to hear from your side, because, you know, I was speaking to somebody before on this very couch, and that's an episode that'll be coming out, who said, hope is not a plan. You know, what do you say as somebody who's in the belly of the beast? And I imagine at times it can be hard when you see so much tough to keep a level of, this can get better. What do you say to us and like myself out there? Because and she moved my needle of hope is not a plan. But what do you say to us when we go, like, and I love what you guys are doing, but where to from here? Where can people look to? How do people who don't know what you're doing engage with you at LHR? And who knows, there may be guys who want to come on board, they didn't realize that this existed, and they're doing work maybe in other spaces that isn't serving their soul, for lack of a better word. How do we get in touch with you to go, Wayne, I don't understand this, or you know, you guys are a wealth of knowledge. Is there a way for guys to get a hold of you guys?
Yeah, there's. So I think I'll address just how you can contact us. We're on social media, Facebook. We have a website. We have 6 offices across the country. We have 1 here in Cape Town, Durban, Johannesburg, Pretoria, Messina, and Uppington. And we have 6 units which deal. So we deal with refugee, migrant rights, land issues, housing issues, gender issues, penal reform issues,
yeah.
environmental issues, business, kind of like the business and human rights angle.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
then my unit, which is strategic litigation, which is public interest litigation. So
Got
it's like we deal with getting cases that will advance the public interest, and that's like very broad based.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, if you kind of just look us up in whatever city you're in and you call us, and yeah, you can drop us a message on Facebook, on Twitter, and so on. We'll get back to you.
And what are the handles for you guys?
So, you're putting me on the spot,
okay.
but it's at LHR_SA for Twitter. On Facebook, you just Google lawyers. I mean, you just search Lawyers for Human Rights.
Lawyers of or Lawyers for?
Lawyers for.
Lawyers for Human Rights, okay.
Yeah, and our website is, I think it's lhr.org.za.
Okay.
But just Google Lawyers for Human Rights in Google, and will be the first thing that will come up.
Yeah, and you know, when I've had you for so long, and what I've decided, actually, I was thinking about it, whether I should open it up, but I want to, because I'm going to have you back on, and I think next time we'll talk. I would have loved to do it this time, but we'll do it and slightly on a different topic, is transformation. But
yes,
I was thinking about it all day, because we've been kind of over the last 24 hours thinking about this, and I think that's such a big subject, transformation within spaces, and for me, my interest is sport, obviously. So
is mine.
Yeah, you know. I mean, Wayne's.
I think it's worth noting that I coached you.
Yeah. Oh yes, it is. Yeah. Like, luckily, I was very, very talented, so I didn't need my. People have called me the LeBron James of Wayne's team, and I was. But whatever, I'm too humble to go on about that. But when you come on and Wayne, something like this, I think, you obviously people can check you out. You are always on across the platforms, across the big media channels. You are always on, and you get shorter things. But what I love is, I would love to have you back on here continuously. And unfortunately, you don't live in Cape Town, so
yeah. Well, we can do Skype or something.
No, we can definitely.
Hopefully, the technology holds up.
Yeah, hopefully, because the internet in Johannesburg is nonsense.
Yeah.
Don't you know that Cape Town is the only first world part of South Africa?
Yeah. the myth about you guys going to Africa, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So we're actually looking to leave Africa because we've got things like 100 meg lines and things you wouldn't understand in Johannesburg. I don't want to bore you with the fine things. But Wayne, it's been huge for me, and we've covered so much. We've covered so much, and it's really, on a personal level, it's an absolute honor that we have flowed in and out of each other's lives, but to have observed. I'm unashamedly biased. Aspirational, competent, and black. When I see it. I'm biased. I am biased. My story, I come from two rural parents, not like in the townships. My parents, although they are graduates, are both from rural South Africa. So when I see people like yourself, and what I love it is, I knew you before now, so it's so great to know the whole story and what you're doing on that level. Of course, I'm selfish in saying, as a black man, for me, seeing you, I'm always looking at someone and I'm going, that's so crazy. Wayne looks like me. I'm capable of that. And not necessarily within that field. I look at it, I'm like, I'm capable of more in whatever I'm doing, because look at him, So, this isn't the last time human rights is an ongoing issue, and I want to leave with the thing for anybody who's watching. And Wayne, of course, something you live. I'm just talking it, you live it. No state is ever just enough. So whether you are white, black, privileged, when you exist with proximity to power, with a poor model, we've out-modeled it now, but it's the Maslow hierarchy of needs. Every undergrad thinks they know everything once they've said that, but nobody uses Maslow's hierarchy of needs anymore. There's far better psychoanalytical models, but let's just use that. When you're closer to the top, which is known as self-actualization, realize, please, all the time, and this is just my opinion, is no state is ever just enough. And those are my words. Zygmunt Bauman, if you don't know him, go and look up his work. The great Zygmunt Bauman passed a couple of years ago. And Wayne, I want to thank you, brother, as an inspiration, and it's an honor to have had you on, bro.
Yeah, no, thank you. We should do this again.
No, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. Wayne, my guy, thank you, man.
All good?
All good indeed, mate.
All right.
Thank you, bro.